As Ian very kindly introduced, I'm Minni Jain, and I'm a operations director for the Flow Partnership, which is an NGO that works with the rejuvenating flooded and desertified lands. So, could we have the first slide, please? How does that go? Sorry. Does that work? Yeah. I've put the title over here called Holding Water and Rural Regeneration, primarily because our first main project was in India, and that we started about 30 years ago. My colleague Rajendra Singh started it about 30 years ago, and that was literally about holding water in the landscape, building small interventions, very similar to check dams, and how do you revive the landscape from, oh, I don't want you to see this yet. Can we go back? The red one, yeah, is it working? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so reviving the landscape, I mean, building small interventions in the landscape that will hold the water, and that's what the title is. So when you hold the water, what happens? If it's a desertified area, if there is no water in the land, the water is held in the place where there are desert-like conditions, and it goes underground, aquifer recharges, and there is ample water in the wells, in the rivers, etc. for life. If it's a flooded area, it holds the water upstream and doesn't become this huge volume which then goes and floods villages and towns downstream. So holding water and rural regeneration. Now, the most interesting thing, which two of my colleagues sitting here in the audience said, I must point out over here, is that the work that we did starting 30 years ago, working with communities, did two things very interestingly. One is we worked with the community with the knowledge that they had and might have forgotten, and built small, low-cost interventions which they themselves could handle. And the second thing that happened after doing this work in an area which was completely flooded, sorry, I beg your pardon, desertified, and there was not even, very little grass and very few people left, that area became rich with water, and the climate changed. So it brought back the small water cycle. So just to show that was the first river in 1985 that my colleague Rajendra Singh, who has been awarded in 2015 the Stockholm Water Prize, that's his project. That was the first river in 1985 that he revived. I mean, that he says was the condition of the river when he was there. And I always remember his words when I first saw the slide. He says, "Do you think that's a road? That's not a road. That was a river." And then the work that they did with the communities and building the interventions, the small check dams, this is the same spot. This is what happened. And so when you work with communities, what can happen? And really, essentially, what I thought I would, having seen this work, this is what happens in desertified areas. We also work in the UK where there are communities who want to know what to do with floods, because the same interventions that you build to stop desertification also stop flooding. It's always a question of community, and the answer always lies with communities. So the title of this session was research and what can universities do to help. And I thought I'd just dwell a couple of minutes on that with the success of this project, and we've revived not one, but not two, but 7 rivers, and we are replicating this across India, what happens is that a lot of people find the project very interesting. And then they want to come and do research, and they do come with good ideas, but often that research is quite an intellectual, the topic of the research is very intellectual. And so I get so many emails per week saying, can we visit your project? I feel very inspired and I would really like to, etc. But where the gap we feel is that we'd love that energy to come and really work collaboratively with the communities. So when they go back, they have actually designed and worked with the communities a system where that research can be taken forward further by the communities themselves. And that is a gap that we face all the time. We find that often the decisions that are made by government and the practical needs of the community, what goes by the name of research, that is very separate to those two things. And that's a question I'd really like audience to think about. How can we design research which isn't rarefied, which isn't just intellectual, which is a mix of a big idea which can actually practically help communities and deliver the kind of impact that one hopes that research can actually give to the world. This last thing, I mean, I know I don't have very much time, so I won't bore you with more. But the last thing that we have really been dwelling on this question of how can research be made available when research happens in places like think tanks and policy organizations and universities. The end result is a beautiful report. It's very glossy, it's slick, it's wonderful to look at, beautiful graphs, it could be digital. The question I have is how many of the world's land tillers, the farmers, the people who actually produce our food and work with the land and steward the land, how many of them globally can read and write? How many of them can actually access a report that is so beautifully presented, has 200 pages, 300 pages? How many of them have the time? How many of them know that way of accessing the report? So in a sense, how can we make really good research which comes out accessible to the very people who need it? I'll leave you with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.